The work you're doing internally is really important. This is time to recognize what grief is coming up in your world. And we're going to have someone on this podcast to talk about what eco grief is and tools that we can use in order to transmute and heal. Don't miss out. She'll also be talking about psychedelics and other really juicy topics. Stay tuned. Welcoming Salix onto the Revillaging podcast. And today we're going to really do a deep dive into eco grief, eco trauma. And I really learned a lot many years ago from Salix facilitating this introduction for me and really encouraging. It was a grief space that we'll talk about later that encouraged me to step up as a person. So yeah, I think we'll start there. And I would also just say, stay till the end, where we're going to talk about Salix's psychedelic practices in a way to also deal with eco grief. So that's really exciting. And just to give a short bio of who Salix is, she studied eco-psychology at Prescott College, is a psychedelic practitioner and integration coach, and also an earth tender, which is dear to my heart. So would you like to share a little bit more about who you are?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for letting me into this space that you are creating, this virtual space where we can connect and rekindle. It has been many years since we have connected, and it's just really good to see you and see you step up and use that momentum that we cultivated a couple years ago at Earth Haven, which is like one of the really beautiful eco-village that's here. It's very well established, one of the most well established in the country eco-villages that is here in Western North Carolina, where I'm coming from, on traditional Cherokee land. Yeah, it's just good to find ourselves back here in this space. And as Chloe mentioned, I'm a psychedelic practitioner and integration coach. So I help people prepare for and navigate and integrate and process psychedelic and non-ordinary experiences primarily, but there's a lot of different rivers that kind of form a confluence that feed that work. And a big basis of that is the field of eco-psychology or deep ecology. And I think that's a big thing that we'll be discussing today and going into. But yeah, a big source of inspiration for me is the earth herself or itself or themselves, all the beings and intelligences of planet Earth. And so when I say I'm an earth tender, it's like I'm tending to a world that we're immersed in, that has so many different forms of aliveness and creativity and expression. And so I'm tending to that with my attention as much as I possibly can, and letting that force of the earth inform my practice. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Let's see where to start. Yeah, I just wanted to have you define what eco grief or eco trauma, I'm still stumbling around which is the best terminology, but we get the idea. What is that for you, and how did you find those words and concepts?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for asking that question, because it just doesn't get asked enough. And it just feels really good to be in a space where I can talk about what is ecological grief. And I may or may not cry. I'm just going to give a little teaser because I have ecological grief, and I think that is the first way in which I started to understand what is ecological grief is by feeling it, actually, and feeling it in my heart and feeling like a real ache in my body for the world that we live in currently, and a lot of the loss that is occurring, and redefining of our relationship to more than human others in a way that isn't really conducive to our health. and our ancestry actually as a species. So that takes a toll, you know. And so I would say like my first understanding of ecological grief, I would probably say was when I was at Prescott College and I started to develop an ecological literate language, and I started to develop an understanding of ecology and identify plants and look at landscapes and really cultivate an understanding of the patterns and forms of nature. And I had this when I was a child too, but it was like, you know, I was developing in a different way in college, but I had this deep connection to the natural world when I was a kid. And so I always had this like love of nature, you know, and then I went to college and I really kind of cultivated that more. And I went to a college that was very much about immersing myself in wilderness and like really forming a relationship with the natural world. And in that relationship, I fell in love. I honestly just like, nature became my muse, and I was enamored by the beauty and diversity and intelligence and adaptability and resilience of our world. And so once you fall in love, you want to protect, right? You want to take care of, you want to tend to, and, you know, and then you start to realize, whoa, like there's not a lot of people that are thinking like that in our society. And you start to feel a little bit alone, and you start to realize that not only are people not thinking that way, but there's like this like active destruction taking place on this thing that I love so much, on this force that I love so much. And that's painful. And so I think I started to just develop a sense of ecological grief naturally before I even really heard the term. And then I started to get really into the work of like Joanna Macy and, you know, the work that reconnects. And she really contextualized a lot of the ecological grief framework for me, and like really helped me process it more deeply.
Yeah, can you talk about that? Because yeah, Joanna Macy's name does come up a lot in those conversations. I actually took my ecovillage design course, and yeah, they were throwing her name around, and we did a few exercises. But I would love for the audience to hear more of her about her work and from your perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, she is like an incredible Buddhist teacher, and really has like done a lot of work about like facilitating reconnection to the planet and really illuminating understanding around how there's basically been a deadening of our response as a species collectively to what's been happening in the world, and our ancient origins as like a connected species and in a connected cosmology, and like tracing our origins back to like actually we're meant to be in relationship. And so a lot of her work in like the Buddhist context deals with like interbeing, which is like this idea that also Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, of just like understanding we are part of all of these other forms of life. We're all interconnected, we're all interbeing, we're not separate selves. Like she really helped me understand that more. It's like, oh, it's an illusion that we're a separate self. Actually, we are completely embedded in relationships, and like these ancient relationships, you know, that we will always have connection to, that we have disconnected ourselves from. And so she really, yeah, she really goes into ecological grief, and then has like a whole series of practices in how to move through that grief, you know, and sort of find our way through it, you know, and support each other in it as well. Awesome. Actions that we could be taking on behalf of the earth and so on.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight her name for people that are more interested to see more of her work, because like I said, it's very well known. So thanks for explaining. And I also just want to appreciate like your vulnerability and able to just like drop into that space and where it's coming from for you, because yeah, that's really, and I've said this a little bit throughout the podcast so far, but this is really like what motivation and inspiration to do good things in the world stems from for me. Because as much as I want to be like, oh, just focus on the solution and what we can do externally, it's like, well, I still wake up very often, or fall asleep or wake up in the middle of the night and am constantly in that space of like, well, the earth is dying in many ways, and we are dying in many ways. And that hurts. So yeah, it does make me want to do like eco-village work and earlier eco-activism work. And it just encouraged me to keep going on my journey. So I do yearn to like be able to drop into that vulnerability more, and I hope that does come out through this podcast. But I do so enjoy holding space for others to also do that, and so thank you for doing it with me. I think I would like to go a little bit into Earth Haven and that experience, which was so cultivating for me. And something I would really love to encourage the audience to do in however way that shapes in their lives. But yeah, that actually, speaking of, was a very vulnerable space for me, because context is, I was just starting to get involved with a eco-village organization called Next Gen, which is youth oriented. In that context, 18 to 28 years old. And it was hosting these gatherings that would go through the range of eco grief, but also, more just like personal development into like who you are, and kind of like cultivating an activism. It shifted throughout the years, but the biggest thing was like making eco-villages more, or making young people more aware to eco-villages and hosting them at different places. So Earth Haven was very magical because there was only a few of us at that one. And of course, as an event, we wanted more, but that's, the number we got, and it felt so nourishing to have, I think it was only 5 of us sitting in a room for 3 days in very close connection. So yeah, going into that, my grandfather was in the hospital and was actually about to pass away. And that was like, obviously very stressful to my body. I thought I had more time, to be honest, because I was 4 hours away. I had not seen him in months. And my family told me, oh yeah, you have more time. And I felt like this was a really important event that I had planned to go to. And it was. Ultimately did pass away through that event, and that that was rough. So that was a part of that grief, right, in that process. But yeah, I think something just to name is like, for grief there is multiple layers, and with eco grief, it's just like, it's so esoteric and so inside of us at the same time that it's hard to like, you can't hug it the way you can be like, oh, I'm grieving over a death of a person, right. So anyways, I'm tangenting here, but to say like what we held, Salix was really holding that space of eco grief, and like defining what it is for us as newbies, and then like allowing us to just like be in deep space. And there was a number of people holding that space and allowing us. And so for me, what I really got out of that was kind of a transition, almost like Joanna Macy like has talks about, but this transition of like sitting with what is, knowing that other people in this room is feeling what I'm feeling, and then directly asking me, what do you want to support you? And that was just huge. It was such like the light just went on, and wow, now I can step into fully who I am, because like I navigated that grief, I talked about it, and then it's like, okay, like you are meant to do something in the world. And that's what this space is. You are meant to do something in the world. What do we do next? So I'll stop there, and I don't know what's coming up for you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was that circle was so powerful, and that time that we shared together, that small intimate group of us, and all of us were sort of blossoming in our understanding of how to hold space for each other in this time. It's just like, this is all learning for me. a deep learning for me. And you're right. Like, it's hard to be like, how do I grieve for the earth? It's like, you can't just go and hug, you know, like it's like a person who's passing, you know, and yeah. And then your grandfather passing too. And then that being maybe an opening and allowing you to go into those depths too, and a softening of your heart, you know, and like grief is really a sign of our love, you know, is really like what I've kind of come to understand grief to be, you know, and that we allow ourselves to feel the sadness around what we're losing. I think it opens up our love, and it's like it reconnects us back to our love and our capacity for love. And so so like being able to hold space for each other like that, you know, and like, I'm just so glad that you're reminding me about that time of like, well, we're all feeling this, and what do we do about it? What do we need? And I think maybe that's the most important question to ask ourselves. It's like, what do we need to move through and process this heaviness in my heart? You know, and like whether that's in the privacy of our own hearts, or whether that's in a community where we're connected to other people and allowing our grief to be witnessed, let yourself feel it, you know, and like let yourself go into it and be with it. And I think Joanna Macy, again, she talks about like there's nothing worse than the deadening of our response, in a way of like just not feeling it because it's so overwhelming, you know, because it's so hard, and it's not easy to be vulnerable. It's not easy to be, you know, to go into those things that hurt. But that's actually like where our strength is the funny thing. It's just like, that's where our strength is in allowing ourselves to soften, you know? And so, yeah, I'm just like feeling really nourished in reflection of that time. And yeah, glad that we were able to share that.
Yeah. And something that's coming up for me in your share is, how do you feel like people, well, I guess it's two-part, my question, because there is like, yeah, what happens when you deaden that response, or that just like neglect that thing that's happening, or like it for me, it's frustration. Like it's like, this is happening, why are you acting like it's not happening, you know? But more so like, what do you think the consequence on an individual level is if they're not able to like, yeah, nurture that, or at least address it within themselves?
Right. It's a really good question. And I would say like it varies from every person, like what those consequences are from an individual perspective, you know, but you know, I mean, there's so many different ways that we psychologically defend ourselves from like going into the things that we know are uncomfortable, because we're afraid that it might be too much, you know, for a variety, like there's so many reasons why people don't go there. And there's also a million ways to distract yourself from going there in our world, and lots of temptation to go outside and not look within ourselves. And so I think one of the consequences though of not going into the grief, of not going into the discomfort, is like, I feel like there might not be a fullness of experience, like a full range of experience. Like you mentioned, like when you process the grief with people, you felt lighter afterwards and like able to mobilize more. It's just like, that's what happens when we like lighten, when we allow ourselves to feel and cry and feel connected to the thing that, you know, we might be losing, you know, and I think that makes us human. And so I think, you know, there's a numbing that comes with not being able to do that, or not doing that enough, not being encouraged to do that, not being educated in how to do that. You know, I mean, it's not like this is common practice. You know, I think that we're societally not very engaged and aware of all these different layers of complex kind of devastation that's going on right now on our planet. And it's hard to look at that stuff. But important too. I think it's very important that we all hold ourselves accountable to be a part of this narrative and alive in this time, as difficult as it may be at times.
Yeah, and something I'm going to address further on in this podcast is what it feels like for other cultures, because I don't know what your cultural background is, but I'm white, and I feel, you know, that's my identification. It's like moving through the world and that type of privilege. But, you know, a big discussion point for me is, yeah, how do other, you know, ethnicities and cultures navigate that, because they might be feeling it more intensely on, you know, a physical level, because their basic needs in some parts of the world, I'm not talking about in the US, but in other parts of the world and parts of the US, we want to turn a blind eye to that, right? But are feeling it more, and yet don't have like words. Like you said, you went to college and you know, you
Right.
found those words to be able to discuss it. They don't have the words sometimes, but yet they have like a way deeper understanding. The Color of Nature is definitely a book I want to talk about. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but that's definitely something I want to approach at some point. But is that something you've heard of?
That's a really, yeah, please explore that. You know, that's a really potent topic, and I really want to hear from Indigenous people and people of color.
Yes.
And people that have had more intact traditions of like earth-based relationships. And I want to hear their perspective, and their voices need to be heard. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So another part, the twofold of that question I asked you a minute ago, is how do you address, especially a, you know, eco-psychologist major, and obviously this is part of like your deep work, how do you address and then walk other people through addressing that grief at this stage, right? And what we're all going through.
Yeah. You know, a lot of it isn't really planned. It's just kind of, it comes up for me. And oftentimes I might be journeying with a psychedelic medicine or be in a non-ordinary state. And that tends to open me up a lot and make me aware of like the bigger worldly energies and the ethos of our society. And I start to feel more grief in those spaces sometimes. And so that has been a really powerful tool for me. And I think a lot of it is just like slowing down my relationship to time and reconnecting with my body, which a lot of medicines kind of facilitate a deepening of that. And there's I also meditate. I have a long meditation practice that really helps me drop in with myself and feel what's there, feel what's really coming up for me. So that's important to have that. And yeah, I mean, I will just, when I spend time outside, you know, feel more connected to the natural world, obviously. And I feel like it's in those spaces that I sometimes feel the grief, you know, and the love and the joy, and, you know, the whole spectrum is available to me, you know, when I'm spending time in natural spaces, in wilderness spaces. So yeah, my practice is really being in nature, I would say, primarily. So I would say like just spending time outside and putting my feet on the earth and looking outwards, looking upwards and noticing nature. And so I think like for me, that's both sort of part of how I grieve, but also part of how I heal at the same time. It's kind of both end. And it's just like this all-encompassing medicine that has been very integral to my ability to move through these times. And then also just like working with non-ordinary states of consciousness, expanded states of consciousness, and deepening my awareness of the natural world through those states has been a really huge part of my practice, as well as like meditating and connecting to other people around these ideas and feelings as well, knowing that I'm not alone.
Yeah, a lot of what I'm hearing you say is a part of like addressing for me is like all in your head, right? Like, oh, that there's that thing and I'm thinking about it, but you're like, well, we have to feel it, we have to go with our bodies, and it's integral. There's not like a, this is step one, this is step two. Like I want to, with my Libra moon, like, and throwing some astrology in there, but like, you know, just analyze, like, oh, this is how you deal with emotion. And it's like, no, it's like you're saying, integral or holistic, and that's what the earth is, and that's what relationship with anything is. And so like really deep, you know, deepening that state, I think and it shows that you do that because you're just able to drop in. You're like, you're there. Like, and that's strong. And I think that makes you able to then host other people to be able to, and encourage them to do that, because we all have to do our own work. And then from there, like, yeah, transmuting it. And what I heard you is like, then we're healing it. And I think healing is like, if you're only thinking about the grief, it's not healing. And that's something I'm also wanting to like talk about in these spaces, is like, it's not just grief, and because it's at some point not healthy to sit in grief, right? Like it is, but like if you're only stuck in that one state, you're not healing to a degree. I don't know how you feel about that statement, but that's like my reflection.
Well, I mean, I do think that feeling the grief is healing, and that it's par for the course, you know, but I think staying stuck there, yeah, that's another story. If you're just stuck in the grief and you're paralyzed by it, you know, then it's hard to move through it. But I think feeling it is healing it, in my opinion, you know, and that's been my experience. And I did in the past, when I was less resourced, go through waves of just grief, and I didn't have any tools. I just was like, I don't know, I just need to feel it. Like, it's just this big well of emotion that aches, that I can't not pay attention to anymore. It's just there. And sometimes it left me feeling pretty hopeless, actually, and a lot of despair. And I think that was part of what was necessary for me. That was like the compost that needed to decompose so that I can like grow something more, you know, fulfilling, and something that was more nourishing, as like, well, what can I make of this? You know, how can I transmute it? Like you said, like transmutation comes up a lot, you know, but yeah, I think we just need to move through it, you know, and there's no way around it, really. So just going through it is important. Meeting it where it's at, meeting yourself where you're at, you know.
Yes. I'm thinking about the tools part, but I think I'm going to save that to the end, because I have a feeling that psychedelics is going to be a big piece for you. So before we get there, I also wanted to talk about another parallel journey that Salix and I have been on, which is Synergia Ranch. And Synergia Ranch is another like big pivot point for me in my activist journey, and also my intentional community journey. Honestly, I found it by wanting to build earthships in Taos, New Mexico. And I was like, well, I want to spend more time, you know, in New Mexico if I'm doing this. And I want to take my permaculture design certification, and Synergia Ranch was offering that. So I did like a whole like work trade, and then permaculture design, or I don't remember the exact order. It was like earthship building. I don't know. There was a lot of going in and out of Synergia Ranch and exploring New Mexico, which is definitely like kin to my heart at this point. But yeah, Synergia Ranch, I'm going to let you talk about it a little bit more, about the Biosphere 2 project. But as far as like the people, it was just amazing, like being consistently around elders that have done some like major work, you know, on this physical realm. Like, it's amazing. They like built a boat out of Chinese junk, and like, you know, like, which is basically floating concrete.
Heraclitus.
Right, the Heraclitus, which was in the 70s, and they actually just like rebuilt it now. Like, and it's living in Spain now. It's just, and they went to the rainforest in Antarctica, and they did Broadway shows with their acting, you know, group, and they have a place in London, a place in Puerto Rico, a place in Australia, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is where we were. And the last thing I'll say before I hand it to you, because me and Salix actually were not there at the same time. We just, I'm sure, have a loving space in our heart for these people and their projects. But for me, yeah, I learned a lot, you know, organic gardening, all that stuff, but also they had this like philosophy of mind, body, heart. I feel, no, it was like mind, body, soul, something like that. And it was also based on like Buckminster Fuller's
Yeah.
theories. But we had acting class, and I was like rolling around with 80-year-old people, 60 to 80-year-old people on the floor and like singing, and it wasn't like a weird thing. Like, I mean, we're all clothed. I've been watching these weird cult things, but anyway, anyways, like it was not that. We were just like doing acting.
It was theater, okay? It was theater.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, theater can get weird, but that's just the nature of theater.
Thank you.
It's good theater, right? If it's weird, it's good.
Yeah, we were being theater elderly people. But yeah, I'll stop there. But yeah, I will post some links in the bottom of the video so you guys can check out what it is. But yeah, why don't you tell me your recollection and also a little bit more about the biosphere too.
Yeah, well, it's so cool that you were there briefly right before I got there. Well, maybe a couple of years. You were probably there, I think, 2 years before I got there about that. But very cool that we have that overlap, and would have been cool if we were there together.
Totally.
But yeah, I learned about biosphere 2 in college before I ever got there. And I didn't know that I was going to live there at some point or live with the people that developed biosphere 2. And in my human ecology class, I learned about biosphere 2, and we took a visit there. And it's this big enclosure that really was brought to life by the people that now live at Synergia Ranch in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Johnny Allen, specifically John Allen, was like the main visionary behind that. And I think the whole impetus was around like, can we live in outer space, and can we colonize outer space? And what would it look like if we were to create a biosphere in beyond this planet, and is that even possible? And so it was a big experiment around that. And so they created these 7 different biomes, completely enclosed. And they did have some air circulating, but the idea was really to get as much air circulating and food being produced inside of these biomes as possible, to see if living in space would be, something that would be possible for humans to do. And it was a really interesting experiment where they all stayed inside for 2 years. In these
I think so. I think they tried to do it twice, actually.
It was 2 years, yeah.
There was like, they failed once and then they tried again. And I don't know if it was all in that 2 years, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's in Tucson, Arizona, right?
Right.
Okay, so it's out in Tucson in the Sonoran Desert, and people can go and visit it and see. It's like a museum now. But yeah, I found my way over there because I had met a friend who lived really nearby, and actually discovered that he lives out there, and I really wanted to go, and I really wanted to explore Synergia Ranch. And so I did. I moved out there and connected with the community, and I started doing some farming and gardening and tending to the orchard that they had, and being a part of the CSA, and working with Tango in Synergetic Press, and doing some publishing stuff and working in the office. And that was really cool. And they also have like a publishing company where they publish all sorts of books on ecology and psychedelics and consciousness and spirituality and pharmacology and ethnobotany and all sorts of really cool, such a blend. It's a synergy of awesome topics. And they published some really good works. And it was great to like hang out with that community. And it is a community of elders that are doing really cool projects and supporting each other and really demonstrating this alternative living environment, and really true to that. And they have like traditions that, like every night, every Tuesday, what we would read to each other after dinner, we would like read a book around the table. Every Thursday it was like, let's do something theatrical and let's create a skit, and perform. And so it was really like its own little bubble in a way of like just this universe that was being created, and such a cool community to connect with.
Yeah, Sunday night dinners were, you probably remember what that is too. Sunday night dinners, so a little background, step back. So the interns and or people living there would be cooking dinner, and we would all change out, and we would all, take turns doing that. And then those people, they would have to do like theater, like you're saying, once or twice a week. But then on Sundays, you're not allowed to talk, and everyone was drinking wine and eating, except if you were saying some statement. I don't even remember what it was, but they all had been saying these statements for like 30 years. And some of them were random, but some of them were like, you know, referencing funny stories or like that they had talked about. And it was just like every night was different and magical there. Like that's what impacted me. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing more of that. Yeah, right. But yeah, we'll share more stories offline. But yeah, so we're nearing the end of this, and I really want to hear about your current work and you know your career, basically your livelihood, and how that relates to eco grief and deep ecology and just those tools you were talking about to navigate.
Sure. So yeah, I work as a psychedelic practitioner. I have my own practice, which is called Expanded States. Great. And for people that are wanting a little bit more support with working with psychedelic medicine, I offer that kind of support and help people just to set intentions for psychedelic experience and really take it seriously as like a ceremony or like a way that you can really cultivate a deeper relationship with the self, with the true self, and connect more deeply with, you know, your one's true nature. And in that process, I feel like it really does help to connect to the nature that we're surrounded by and the natural world. And so I will offer, you know, for people too, it's like if people are going through ecological grief or experiencing that or something like that comes up in their session, I'm there as an ally to really like help people process that as much as I can, you know, while also understanding that I'm still processing that. And I don't know that I'll ever get to a point where I won't be, you know, it's just like this ongoing process, you know, of like just transformation that's happening, inner and outer transformation. And yeah, you can find my work at expandedstates.net. I'm actually developing.
I'll definitely be linking it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm still like kind of a little in development mode, but that's going to be launching really soon.
Great.
And my Instagram, expanded.states. If anybody wants to come find me and learn more about my work. But I would say like, yeah, I'm offering psychedelic services. And if people have a particular, you know, wanting to explore their relationship with the natural world, I would be delighted to really support people in that process of just like connecting more with nature, as an herbalist as well. So that really informs my process as well as just like working with plant medicine, and in like psychoactive and non-psychoactive ways, you know, and really just developing a relationship with a diversity of different flora, you know, and eating wild foods and spending time in nature and learning about the ecology of our own bioregions and things like this, I think are all really important and part of like what makes us whole as humans is being like connected to the place that we live in. So like bioregional awareness is like a therapy actually in and of itself. And it's something that I feel like really soothes the psyche, you know, and the soul, and having that connection to place and sense of awareness of the place that we live in and the more than human others that we're surrounded by. And so I'm always bringing that into my work as like a transpersonal practitioner, you know, more than other, and as an animist. And so I just really feel like I want to encourage more of an animistic perspective and a cosmology of connection, you know.
Can you define what animist means?
Yeah, it's just, it's really like the sense that humans are not the only persons on this planet. Like there's other beings on this planet that also have a personhood and like the right to be here and an intelligence, and that we coexist with others. And even an entire ecosystem is its own kind of personhood, you know, and a mountain and a river And so it's recognizing the aliveness of all of these, you know, intelligences, you know, that we're surrounded by, and recognizing the aliveness of it, and, you know, maybe just having more of a relationship with that. Yeah. So I feel like to be an animist is to be in practice with those other beings, you know, and so I was just embodying it, feeling it, recognizing it, and cultivating a relationship with a more than human other.
Awesome. Yeah. If there's like one tool you would like to share with people listening to just like when grief or trauma is coming up in different forms, or even anxiety, like you and I were talking about anxiety at some point, like what would you say that is?
That's a great question. I would say that recognizing it is really important, and allowing it to be there, and not resisting it to the degree that you feel safe doing that, to the degree that it feels safe to engage with your own grief. Go there to the degree that you're allowed to, and that you give yourself permission to, and let yourself go as deep as you're able to. And it might be incremental that you go deeper into that. But then I think once you feel it, like we were talking about, like you don't want to just stay in it for too long. So I think something that's been really helpful for me is like offering myself compassion when it comes up, and like recognizing, oh, this is all part of my love. You know, this pain is actually totally tied to love. And so remembering that and just being like, wow, like this is my compassion and my love for the world that I'm actually feeling. And it's what makes me human, and it's what makes me connected to others. And it's a beautiful thing. And so I think like recontextualizing it, like getting away from grief is bad, you know, like don't feel it. You're not supposed to feel it, to being like, actually, it's really normal and natural. And I think the earth wants us to grieve, actually, you know, and I think maybe the earth is even grieving on some level. I sometimes feel
100%.
So like, what if we're just acting out that, you know, as a species, you know? And so
I definitely feel like I feel the earth's heart. Like it's the grievance and the energy that I feel about the earth is like, this is not me. Like I am connected. Like I am connected right now because I cannot push this away at all.
Right. Well, that's because we're porous, because we are, you know, we are connected. We are the earth, you know, we look like these separate bodies, but we are actually the earth, all of us, being expressed, and we're expressing the earth through us. And so it makes sense that we would feel that hurt because of what's happening on a global scale right now. I mean, how could we not feel that, you know? And I sometimes feel like I feel it more, like I'm deeply feeling it for, especially on behalf of a lot of people that aren't. And so there's almost like Aldo Leopold once said, like, one of the consequences of getting an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. And so it's like when you're aware, you can feel it more. And so it goes back into like, some people don't have the education or the privilege to even know, you know? And so it's like, I'm feeling grief on behalf of all the people that aren't, because for whatever reason, they can't at this time. And it needs to be felt and processed.
Yes, if that's one thing that we could really leave it as, is that I feel like, gosh, we could just keep getting into this. I'm just gonna sit with it for a minute before, because it's so, like I said before, it's just so frustrating. But at the end of the day, like I have to try to remind myself, like, although I get angry at my roommates or, you know, my partner or whoever about not recycling sometimes, or like doing these, like really, if you think about very minute things, but it's just like, that's how eco grief comes up inside me. It's like, oh, I'm angry because like, why are they being lazy? Like, why I try so hard to do these little things. It's like, the human brain just like does that, like, oh, recycling's gonna fix the world. Like, what? Like, no.
Right.
Like, we're doing our part. Like,
I've been there. I've definitely totally understand that. Yeah.
Right.
It's a thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share before we stop the podcast?
Just that I feel really glad that we got to, have this conversation and reconnect in this way. I'm glad you're here too. You live pretty close to me, so I would love to have you over for some tea sometime. We can discuss this more and just stay connected. And I would just love to continue supporting this project.